Welcome to Impacting Jamaica, where we shine the spotlight on the many but often ignored positive happenings, activities, projects and investments at every level across every sector to inspire, motivate and excite people everywhere.
My father and my mom, from Clarendon, that took up the first opportunities to come to the UK. And of course, all the kids were left behind with the grandmas. And it was up to the grandmothers and the grandparents, not just the grandparents, to be able to bring up the kids. And of course, I was left behind with my grandma. Her name was Miriam. And we didn't have much. I suppose the only thing that she really had and that she knew was how to cook and how to look after these 5 children that she was left with. All of a sudden, when my mom and dad went to the UK, she was left with this, with 5 children. And the only thing that she could do as a woman then was just to teach us the stuff that she knew as a woman back then in the 60s and 70s. And the main thing that she knew was how to cook and was how to be able to make these wonderful relishes or sauces, whatever she called it back then. It wasn't called sauce, it was more of a relish that we always had the yams, the potatoes, the bananas, and all the sort of provisions of the food that my grandfather would grow out in the backyard, the ackee tree, everything was there. But the only thing that we couldn't afford was the other things to make the meal, a rounded meal. But my grandma was just great at just making these sauces without meat, just using herbs and spices and a little bit here and a little pinch of this there that we all grew in the garden anyway. And by the time you put that onto the provision of the green bananas and your yam and everything else that you grew anyway, it felt like you was having an absolutely heavenly meal just by what she could do with these simple herbs and spices. And that's what she was good at. And for me, it was great that I was the youngest. So I got the longest of times with her because it was always the youngest that was last to come over because your parents didn't want a young child in the UK. They were too busy working 3 or 4 jobs to be able to do it. And the other elder kids need to go to school to be able to go through education, to be able to quickly leave education and then help the family. That was the way it was back then. So the youngest one always get left behind underneath the grandmother's frock tail and pull, and that was me. And but learned everything that she could throw at me, through her knowledge about food. And I watched and I took in absolutely everything and loved everything. Every song that she sang, being part of the Baptist church in Owls Content. Every musical note that she ever sang to me as a child stayed with me until eventually it was my time to leave her. And it was perhaps the saddest part of my life ever to leave this wonderful woman who was mother, father, cock and hen and everything to me as a child, and then having to leave her and come to this new country, which I didn't ask to come here. I didn't even look at me and says, young man, do you really want to leave this beautiful woman and this idyllic paradise of a place that you were with every tree has fruits on it and every rivers of jumping fish and everything as it was back then. Nobody asked me if I wanted to leave, but I did have to pull myself away from her. But I took everything that I could of that knowledge of the food and the songs and the stories and the Anansi stories and everything that she brought me up on. And I think that's what made me into the man who I am today.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to hear you speak about your grandmother and your grandparents and how their influence has really just, like you said, made you into the man that you are. You're a musician, you're a chef, and it's just like hearing you speak about your grandmother. I can imagine you in the kitchen and seeing her humming around, making her sauces. It's really, really a fascinating upbringing that you've had. Talk to me about where you are now, because you do so many things. Like I mentioned, a musician, a broadcaster, you have your own radio show, you're an entrepreneur. You have countless products as well in the supermarket. What's your secret to success? I know it's a lot of hard work, but how do you function every day and manage to still do every single thing so well?
Each person's secret to success will be different because you will be surrounded by different people and different scenarios. So your journey, it is all about you. So mine won't be like anybody else, but I think it could inspire others. And I think the key part of my story and the reasons how I managed to do that is to be very resilient and being able to adapt be adaptable to change. And I'm having to learn that in the latter part of my life, because as a Jamaican and as a Caribbean person and as a Rastaman also, it didn't allow me to change. Because, you always be singing the same song, as Bob Marley say, it's always about redemption songs. And that's how I grew up, with that attitude towards me. And it wasn't until when I sort of became the new Levi Roots, I suppose. When I got educated myself, I had to go through prison at Her Majesty's pleasure and everything to be able to come outside, to be able to see some other light than what I was seeing when I was growing up as a Rastaman via that way. And it was a discovery at a later part of me that I needed to change. You have to change from where you're coming from, because your journey may have ended there, where, you had come to. And if you don't discover the new you at such a point when you get there, then you'll always be going through shallows and in miseries. You will never get your tide that will be big enough to take you off your desert island and swoop you straight into paradise where you want to be, if you don't recognize the tide when it comes. And the tide is always rocky and rough. So sometimes you don't even recognize it. So it's that change you have to recognize that you need to change. You have to be susceptible to change. You have to be a bit like a chameleon lizard. The one that when it's on the thing, and no matter where he's from, he just blends in and you can't see him like that. That's how we needed to be after what I knew, what we went through as a people. And we, Rasta always teach you that you're living in Babylon, and His Imperial Majesty had said that when you're in Babylon, you need to be able to function as not like them, but as a part of the system. His Imperial Majesty said that. Otherwise, you need to get yourself out of there. Unfortunately, some of us can't do that. So we have to be able to blend in and be able to function. And when my time came that all of a sudden I was usurped into a position of having these great people like, Peter Jones and, doing all kind of different things with business people that I could never have dreamt that all of a sudden I was in it. Maybe I would thought it could have taken you years, and you think, yeah, you believe it and you've worked hard and you've learned to get there. But for me, it was just boop, all of a sudden you're there. And when you're there, you have to perform. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's ejection straight away, because these people that you're knowing is not going to take you if you're not the real deal that they had believed you who you to be. So it's having to be able to change and to be able to fit into that room, and I'd be able to get there with these business people. When I'm talking to the chief of Sainsbury's, that could make you as somebody who's making a sauce in your kitchen, and the second biggest, supermarket in the whole country. You're talking to the chief of the head of the man, and you've only just been in the business for a few weeks. You have to be able to change from being the Rasta man that was on the streets of Brixton back then and a hustler and a do all type of things and all these things, to being the person who this man expect you to be. So is that what I learned? And I think that's my greatest message that I can give to people. If your aim is to be at the top, at the very top, you have to believe that those people that's going to be in there, it's not going to be someone like yourself. It's not going to have the knowledge where you are. You have to be able to step up to where they are. Still be you, but function, into the way that you can be able to feel comfortable with them where they are.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Impacting Jamaica. If you or anyone you know is involved with projects and activities that excite, motivate, and encourage, send us an email to impactingjamaica@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Do join us again for another in the series on Google Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and Stitcher. You can also visit us at impactingjamaica.com.